It would have been great to have seen Buttigieg, the head of Norfolk Southern, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, maybe even someone from the White House, standing at a podium saying, we are your partners. We're going to work with the local fire department and local community to make sure that people are put back in their homes safely. That didn't happen.
So when Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said that there are about 1,000 train derailments each year, you can imagine he raised a lot of eyebrows. East Palestine, Ohio is a major disaster, of course, but what else is going on? Michael Balboni was an advisor to the freight railroad company CSX and also led the New York State Office of Public Safety, advising the governor on things like derailments. So, Michael, good to have you back on Centerpoint. If you were talking to Norfolk Southern right now, what would you be saying to that CEO?
It's all about communication and the management of expectations, transparency, all the basics that you know very well about, that when you have a crisis, you've got to be on the ground, you've got to have the right information, you've got to have people and resources applied to this. You know, that right now what's happening is they're captured by the narrative, they're not providing the narrative. And that's really bad when you have this type of an event.
Have they handled this properly from the beginning or no? The CEO was there recently. He's handing out $1,000 to every resident who can't, you know, drink their water. But how bad have they mishandled this?
2 weeks into this, nobody was talking to them. It was only after they were embarrassed by the national news media that they decided they were going to show up. They should have been there first couple of days, and they should have been on the ground. I'm not necessarily talking about the president of Norfolk Southern, but certainly a lot of representatives, and they should have laid out a plan. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to test. Here's where we're going to send the results. This is how we're going to help the community. We're partners in this. You know, that's the point, Rob, that you have to kind of take into account. These railroads, these tracks go through so many different communities. And if you don't set the right tone when you have a disaster like this, then not only is this community certainly going to have problems with you, but then other communities. And that's a bad scenario for rail transportation.
Tell us about the government response so far. You got a lot of different agencies, and when you were in New York, you had to deal with multiple agencies responding, and sometimes they all get caught up with one another and, you know, who does what.
Right.
But here you have the federal government and Ohio State. You've got local county, you got local fire departments dealing with this. What would you say to them? And from your view so far, 30,000 feet away, is this being handled, again, by the government agencies well?
No, there really is kind of a lack of transparency as to the coordination. So the National Transportation Safety Board is the place you can look to say, okay, so what happened? You're going to do an investigation. And they should have come out right away and said, we are looking at the video. There's a fire that happened, that was observed in the back of the train. We believe that's going to be the point of focus. Okay. Then you need the EPA to come in and say, we know what was on those containers. And we know what the properties are. We're going to put resources in there right now to do plume modeling, soil sample testing, and then we're going to give you a grid of the affected areas as best we can determine. You know, when I was back in office, we didn't have the kind of technology that they have right now, just drones, the ability to sense where plumes are going. That exists now, so deploy it. And then lastly, you know, leadership does count. And the rail industry is so incredibly important. So it would have been great to have seen Buttigieg, the head of Norfolk Southern, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, maybe even someone from the White House, standing at a podium saying, we are your partners. We're going to work with the local fire department and local community to make sure that people are put back in their homes safely. That didn't happen.
These toxic chemicals, the plume, it knows no boundaries, and yet this incident, East Palestine, is right on the border of Pennsylvania. So you have now multiple states that could be affected. That in and of itself makes it even more difficult to deal with on a coordinated level. How, you know, when you were in New York, you had New Jersey that you bordered. So in that instance, how do you deal with another state that's not technically affected, but they will be or could be?
It all begins with the relationships you have ahead of time. You know, when I was there, it was incredibly important to have relationships with the security officials in New Jersey, particularly when we were dealing with the PATH train, which is obviously the railroad that goes from downtown Manhattan over to the side of Jersey City. And so, we talked with all sorts of folks there to say, how do we protect this? And back then, the World Trade Center site was just an open pit and was vulnerable to other types of attacks. And so we had to work together on that. And we actually created a program using the National Guard. It's things like that. But, the problem here is that there's so many different communities. And as Buttigieg says, he says there are 1,000 derailments a year of toxic chemicals. That's not what our research showed. It's still a big number. But over the last 10 years, they average between 550 to 800 derailments involving toxic chemicals. Now, that's a lot, but it's so important to be able to talk to the communities immediately to say, you're safe, here's what's happened. Not all of them are like this derailment.
So what are the cause of these derailments? Is it human error? Is it problems on the track? Is it, what is it?
Yeah. Yes, to all those things. First of all, if you take a look at the industry, back in 1950, this is a staggering statistic, there were 1 million railroad workers in this country, 1 million. Now there are 150,000. In fact, since I think it was 2018, they've lost 40,000 workers. So what's happening across the country as it relates to the lack of workforce has affected this industry as well. In addition to which, there have been all of these proposals to change some rail safety requirements, everything related to the human relations, the HR, how do you discipline workers, how do you keep them trained properly, to the technology. There are a bunch of different technological pieces that need to be instituted, but they cost money. And so everyone's concerned about any type of cost increase as it affects consumer prices and the transportation of goods, especially in an environment where we see the kind of inflation we're seeing now.
We certainly pray for the people in East Palestine. And in the final 30 seconds, Mike, do you think that East Palestine will ever recover from something like this, as toxic as those chemicals are?
Yeah. I think it is. They will come back, but it's going to take constant monitoring. It's going to take constant partnering with the agencies that have the ability not only to detect what's going on, but then to clean it up and then make sure that if people are affected, they get them the help they need.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for your insight. We'll have you back.
Thank you very much.